Julius Nyerere Dam, Tanzania. Hydropower ambitions drowned a World Heritage Site. Tanzania's Julius Nyerere Dam, formerly known as Stigler's Gorge, rises 134 meters inside the Selous Game Reserve, one of Africa's greatest ecosystems. Built for $3.6 billion, it creates a reservoir covering over 1,200 square kilometers, an area larger than Los Angeles. The dam promises 2,115 megawatts of power, but at a catastrophic cost. Elephants, black rhinos, and countless other species lose their habitats forever. UNESCO has already flagged the project as incompatible with World Heritage status, and Selous has been effectively stripped of its designation. The engineering feat is real. Roller-compacted concrete, spillways, and transmission corridors, but so is the irreversible loss. Tanzania's grid may gain electricity, but global biodiversity and tourism are sacrificed in exchange. Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD. The Nile's biggest dam project is driving regional water wars. Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, a 145-meter-high, 1.8-kilometer-long wall of concrete, creates a reservoir covering nearly 2,000 square kilometers. At a cost of more than $5 billion, it offers 6,000 megawatts of cheap hydropower and symbolizes national pride. But every filling of its reservoir sparks outrage downstream. Egypt, dependent on the Nile for 90% of its water, fears catastrophic shortages, while Sudan faces risks from flooding and dam safety. Sediment builds behind the dam, eroding the delta further, and environmental concerns compound the diplomatic tension. For Ethiopia, GERD is a leap toward electrification and economic independence. For its neighbors, it's a looming threat to food security, water stability, and regional peace. A structure meant to unite a country instead divides an entire region, proving how a single megaproject can destabilize nations far beyond its borders. Tren Maya, Mexico. Mexico's dream train is sinking into caves, debt, and ecological damage. The Tren Maya runs 1,554 kilometers across the Yucatan Peninsula, cutting through jungles and fragile karst landscapes riddled with caves and cenotes. Engineers drilled piles into porous limestone, often collapsing delicate cave ceilings and threatening the aquifer beneath. Initially budgeted at $8 to $9 billion, the project has exploded to nearly $30 billion, or $20 million per kilometer of track, much of it managed by the military with accelerated clear-cutting. The train has begun partial operations, but ridership remains underwhelming and operating losses mount. Jaguars lose their roaming corridors. Indigenous communities claim they were sidelined, and environmentalists warn of irreversible aquifer contamination. Contractors and resorts along the line stand to profit, but taxpayers subsidize failure while ecosystems unravel. The Tren Maya was pitched as a tourism boom. It now stands as a case study in how rail can bankrupt nature and budgets at once. NEOM, the line, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's $500 billion desert megacity has collided with human rights and hard math. The line was sold as a 170-kilometer mirrored skyscraper slicing through the desert, with two parallel walls 500 meters high enclosing futuristic urban life. Excavators dug trenches, concrete was poured, and engineering firms cashed in. But by 2024, the scope was dramatically scaled back to only a few tens of kilometers. The costs remain astronomical, hundreds of billions for a shrunken strip of glass and steel. Behind the dream are even darker realities. Forced evictions of the Hawatat tribe, with UN experts warning in 2023 of death sentences linked to their resistance. Artificial islands and coastal infrastructure are reshaping fragile Red Sea ecosystems, while Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund bleeds billions to sustain the vision. NEOM has become less a beacon of innovation than a case study in overreach, where global consultants walk away with profits and taxpayers, displaced communities, and the environment shoulder the wreckage. HS2 High-Speed Rail, United Kingdom. Britain's flagship high-speed rail turned into one of the most expensive money drains in transport history. HS2 began as a plan to connect London with Birmingham, Manchester, and Leeds, with tunneling machines boring under the Chiltern Hills and viaducts spanning farmland. By October 2023, however, the northern legs were scrapped, leaving only the London-Birmingham section. Costs ballooned from £33 billion in 2010 to between £54 and £66 billion in 2024, translating to nearly £500 million per kilometer. Even canceling the northern stretch costs up to £100 million in closure work. Governance churn, station redesigns at Euston, and inflation turned what could have been a sustainable transport revolution into a political embarrassment. Contractors continue building and collecting, but taxpayers have to endure a terrible price while northern cities lose promised investment and capacity. Nusantara New Capital, Indonesia. Indonesia's escape from sinking Jakarta is threatening Borneo's last wilderness. Nusantara, a brand new capital city carved from East Kalimantan's forests, carries a $32 to $33 billion price tag, but remains plagued by shaky financing and high-profile resignations, including top 2 officials in 2024. Bulldozers are clearing peat swamps and mangroves, sinking foundations into unstable soils, and building a palace shaped like a Garuda bird. The engineering gamble ignores malaria-prone wetlands, fire-prone peatlands, and some of the last orangutan and biodiversity habitats in Southeast Asia. Peat drainage will release massive stores of CO2, undoing climate goals, while fires threaten local communities. Investors remain hesitant, and timelines are already slipping. Jakarta may gain relief from overcrowding and subsidence, but Borneo loses irreplaceable ecosystems. Indigenous communities lose land, and taxpayers absorb spiraling costs. East African Crude Oil Pipeline, EACOP. Africa's longest heated pipeline is cooking up climate disaster. The East African Crude Oil Pipeline will run 1,443 kilometers across Uganda and Tanzania, transporting waxy crude that must be electrically heated the entire way. At $5 billion, the engineering challenge involves burying a 24-inch pipe through wetlands, villages, and farmlands, displacing tens of thousands of people along its corridor. Human rights groups warn of delayed compensation and inadequate resettlement. While once operational, the line will emit more than 34 million tons of CO2 annually, equal to the emissions of many small countries. The project threatens Lake Victoria's basin with potential spills, while undermining global climate commitments. Governments and oil companies hope for revenue, but the real winners are investors short on scruples, while farmers, ecosystems, and the planet itself carry the costs. Mekong mainstream dams and Funan Techo Canal, Southeast Asia. The Mekong River, lifeline of 60 million people, is being strangled by concrete walls. Dozens of mainstream dams funded by Chinese and regional banks have fragmented this 4,350-kilometer river into reservoirs. Natural flood pulses that fertilized rice paddies and supported the world's largest inland fishery are disrupted, while migration routes for giant catfish and hundreds of other species are cut off. Studies in 2024 found 1/5 of Mekong fish species now at risk, with megafish shrinking towards extinction. Cambodia's proposed Funan Techo Canal threatens to further alter the delta's delicate balance, drawing saltwater into farmland and destabilizing fisheries. Upstream countries and power exporters may profit from hydropower, but downstream farmers face hunger and economic collapse. What was once one of the most fertile river systems on Earth is being engineered into a fragmented series of lakes, collapsing food security for an entire region. Belo Monte Dam, Brazil. Brazil's giant Amazon dam is a green mirage hiding ecological ruin. The $18 billion Belo Monte Dam on the Xingu River was touted as clean energy, yet its run-of-river design diverts 80% of the river's flow into artificial canals and turbines, leaving the Volta Grande stretch starved of water. Indigenous Jaruna and Ribeirinho communities were uprooted, fisheries collapsed, and flooded forests now emit methane that undermines its environmental credentials. Completed in 2019, Belo Monte was meant to provide 11,000 megawatts, but in dry seasons it produces far less than promised. Energy companies collect profits in wet years. However, local livelihoods, biodiversity, and climate goals suffer permanent damage. Instead of bringing sustainable energy to Brazil, the dam has turned into a permanent scar on the Amazon, symbolizing how green megaprojects can devastate the very environment they claim to protect. Panama Canal post-expansion. The Panama Canal's expansion revealed how climate can choke global trade. Completed in 2016 with a $5.25 billion investment, the third set of locks allowed the passage of enormous Neo-Panamax vessels, doubling capacity. But in 2023, historic drought hit Gatun Lake, the canal's freshwater lifeline, forcing authorities to cut daily transits from 38 ships to just 18. Draft restrictions stranded ships, and auctions for scarce slots soared into the millions. sending ripple effects through world supply chains. By mid-2025, rains restored traffic, but the vulnerability remained structural. Without new reservoirs, the canal cannot survive prolonged dry spells. The engineering marvel of its water-saving basins and colossal locks is undermined by a simple fact: climate change is shrinking the water that sustains it. For global shipping, the canal is a critical artery. For Panama, it's a fragile lifeline built on increasingly unreliable rain. China's South-North Water Transfer Project. China's water megaproject bleeds rivers dry to quench thirsty cities, costing over $70 billion. The South-North Water Transfer spans thousands of kilometers of canals, aqueducts, and pumping stations, diverting water from the Yangtze Basin to arid northern provinces. The middle route alone displaced more than 330,000 people when the Danjiangkou Reservoir was raised. While Beijing and Tianjin gained secure supplies, donor basins are left with reduced flows, polluted return water, and ecological imbalance. Open canals evaporate enormous volumes, wasting a resource meant to alleviate scarcity. Engineering achievements. Long aqueduct bridges and massive pumping stations mask the social and ecological upheaval beneath. The winners are thirsty megacities and industrial hubs. The losers are rural communities, farmlands, and ecosystems permanently altered. Three Gorges Dam, China. The world's largest dam is drowning history, displacing millions and shaking the earth itself. China's Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River stands 181 meters tall and stretches 2.3 kilometers across, with a reservoir over 600 kilometers long. At $32 billion, it produces 22,500 megawatts of power, but the hidden costs are staggering. More than 1.2 million people were displaced, entire towns submerged, and archaeological treasures lost underwater. Scientists warn the immense reservoir has altered the region's seismic activity, and landslides along its shores have already claimed lives. Downstream, the Yangtze Delta suffers from silt starvation, eroding farmland and weakening ecosystems that support hundreds of millions of people. The project remains an engineering marvel, but also one of the most socially and environmentally disruptive megaprojects in modern history. Dubai's Palm Islands, United Arab Emirates. Luxury tourism has carved ecological destruction into the sea. Dubai's Palm Islands, artificial archipelagos shaped like palm trees, were built by dredging and dumping 100 million cubic meters of sand and rock into the Persian Gulf. Marketed as wonders of modern engineering, they're now linked to massive coastal erosion, disrupted currents, and suffocating coral reefs buried under sediment. The cost of Palm Jumeirah alone exceeded $12 billion, and while villas and hotels gleam, maintenance of the unstable sand foundations continues to drain resources. Residents and scientists report that water circulation around the island stagnates, creating polluted lagoons. Local fishing stocks collapsed, and natural beaches are disappearing. Developers and elite homeowners strive like winners. However, marine ecosystems and the coastline itself suffer terribly. The Palm Islands stand as a glittering mirage, visible from space, but leaving scars that the ocean may never heal. California's Oroville Dam crisis, United States. America's tallest dam that promised cheap water and hydroelectricity flipped into a billion-dollar hazard threatening lives, rivers, and entire communities. Oroville Dam in Northern California, 230 meters high, holds back the largest reservoir in the state. In February 2017, after heavy rainfall, its main spillway cracked open, sending torrents of water cascading uncontrollably. Emergency crews rushed to evacuate 188,000 people downstream as fears of catastrophic collapse mounted. Repairs eventually cost over $1 billion, but investigations revealed decades of neglected maintenance and flawed construction dating back to the 1960s. Sediment flows, erosion, and unsafe water releases scarred ecosystems and riverbanks for years afterward. The Oroville scare highlighted how even completed megaprojects can turn disastrous when upkeep is ignored. Kenya Standard Gauge Railway, SGR. Kenya's prestige rail became a debt trap on steel tracks that directly affected the livelihood of the population for the worst. Built between Mombasa and Nairobi at a cost of $4.7 billion, financed through Chinese loans, the 480-kilometer line was supposed to pay for itself through freight and passenger services. Instead, demand fell short, and operating costs ballooned. By 2023, Kenya's Auditor General flagged over $260 million in penalty interest and losses, exposing how poorly structured loans lock the country into fiscal stress. The railway itself works. Bridges, tunnels, and trains are modern, but the economics are broken. Contractors and logistics firms benefited up front, but Kenyan taxpayers shoulder a burden that starves healthcare and education budgets for decades. Nicaragua Grand Canal. Cancelled. Nicaragua's Dream Canal nearly became a nightmare. Pitched as a $50 to $100 billion rival to the Panama Canal, the Grand Canal would have stretched 278 kilometers across the country, slicing through Lake Nicaragua and displacing over 100,000 people. Construction never advanced beyond surveys and token work, but for nearly a decade, the plan destabilized politics, attracted protests, and sparked international outrage. Civil society movements mobilized against the displacement and ecological risks, while financial backers grew wary. On May 8, 2024, the government finally canceled the concession, ending the saga. If built, it would have permanently scarred Central America's largest freshwater lake and bulldozed indigenous lands. Though stopped in time, the Grand Canal remains a cautionary tale. Megaproject fantasies can destabilize nations even when they never break ground.